Hello, this is Professor Reichel. I wanted to welcome you to the class and also to the first PowerPoint presentation. These presentations are going to follow what I would normally do in an on-campus class. So we're going to highlight some material from the textbook itself, but also bring in some information that I think is supplemental to the chapter material and that hopefully you'll find interesting as well. I also want to apologize in advance for any interruptions that might occur. I'm doing this from my basement office, and as a result, I can't always control telephone ringing and doorbell ringing, and it's going to be difficult for me to remove those, so I'll stop them as quickly as I can, or stop the presentation as quickly as I can if those interruptions should occur, but I suspect that I won't always be successful, so I do apologize in advance. As we go through these chapters, I'm going to break them usually into two parts, just to make download a little bit easier when you're looking at them or trying to access them. I also will be having some sample quizzes during the PowerPoint presentations that I would ask you to participate in so that you can kind of get an idea of what types of questions can be asked about the material, and also to get an idea of how you're doing, how you're retaining information from the PowerPoints themselves. So having said that, let's get started with Chapter 1, An International Perspective. This chapter highlights why comparative studies are important. And as you'll read in the textbook, there are two areas, provincial benefits and universal benefits, that are emphasized. The provincial benefits basically present an argument that whenever we want to better appreciate our own system, in this case a justice system, it is quite often helpful to be able to have a point of contrast. Basically, the system that we grow up with is the one that we know best for obvious reasons. It's the one that, in the United States anyway, we see movies about and read books about. And because of that, we might come to believe that our way of doing things in the United States is the only way, not really understanding various options that might be available. And when that happens, it becomes problematic if we aren't open to alternatives. So one of the things that comparative studies does for us is to provide us with points of contrast. We might end up deciding that the United States system, for example, or the Canadian system, or the German system, is in fact the best system, depending upon what our own particular one is. But until we know what other options are available, we can't really be secure in that knowledge. So the provincial benefits of comparative studies is to provide that point of contrast and to open our minds to the possibility that there might be other ways, maybe even better ways, of accomplishing tasks. The universal benefits are increasingly apparent to us as we read more and more about transnational crimes that are occurring. It's going to be quite likely that those of you who go into or are already in practitioner areas within the criminal justice system are going to have opportunities to interact with individuals who are also practitioners in other countries. Combating transnational crime is increasingly important for obvious reasons, and because of that, it's going to be increasingly important as well to understand how other systems of justice operate. And taking a comparative perspective can help provide that knowledge, that information, so that we better understand how the policing system or court system or corrections, whatever it might be, works in other countries. And that knowledge should help us interact with individuals, practitioners from other countries, and eventually increase the likelihood of cooperative arrangements in combating crime, specifically transnational crime. Now, regarding those universal benefits, there are two types that are typically mentioned. Neighbor cooperation is the first of those two types. In this particular one, we highlight the area of bilateral agreements. And using the United States as an example, we have bilateral agreements, for example, with both our northern and our southern neighbors. In Canada, the long-standing agreements that we have basically with law enforcement and cooperation include various treaties and extradition agreements, mutual legal assistance kind of agreements that provide an asset sharing opportunities for Canadian and U.S. forces. Particular examples include the annual U.S.-Canada cross-border crime forum, for example. These crime forums allow us to coordinate policy matters and operation procedures between law enforcement in the two countries. There are, in addition, several memoranda of understandings, MOUs, such as the one designating the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police as the points of contact for any drug-related matters. These are just a couple of examples of these bilateral agreements that allow us to work closely in the United States and Canada in terms of law enforcement, since that border that we have is a political border and not a physical, well, of course it's a physical border, but not a border that stops criminals, for example, necessarily between the two countries. So crime that occurs in one country and transfers over into another country, we need to have some way in which those law enforcement agencies can work together to combat that crime. Same is true, of course, for the southern border of the United States. The United States-Mexico bilateral agreements exist, as they do in Canada as well. But here, however, we haven't had quite as much success in the United States in attaining that type of law enforcement cooperation as we've had with our northern border. The problem isn't so much in getting each country to agree on what should be accomplished, but rather in how those agreements are actually implemented. The particular concern is with the United States has an upper hand in those bilateral agreements. The United States has more sophisticated law enforcement technology. Training is seen as being a little bit more advanced for law enforcement officials. The level of corruption in Mexico, which is clearly admitted to by the Mexican authorities. The current Mexican president is very much interested in trying to reduce that corruption. But because of the existence of and the acknowledgement of that corruption in law enforcement in Mexico, the United States and Mexican agreements don't always get implemented in the manner that either country would like for them to be. In any event, those are examples of how those neighbor cooperations are created in an attempt to achieve universal benefits between the United States and its northern and southern neighbors. Another type of universal attempt is with multinational agreements. In these instances, as the term itself implies, the agreements aren't necessarily between just two countries, but instead of a grouping of countries. And here, probably one of the best examples is the European Union and the countries comprising the European Union. Your textbook was written or went to print before the most recent country was added to the European Union. As a result, your textbook says that there are 27 European Union countries. There are, in fact, 28 now. Croatia was added in 2013. These countries, working as part of the European Union, have come up with a variety of ways in which they can share everything from economics to, in our case, justice systems. Because of the changes in passport agreements, it's now much easier to move about all the European Union countries. That's not true only of law-abiding citizens, but obviously true of criminals as well. And because of that, there have been a couple agencies established to carry out some of these multinational agreements. Europol and Eurojust are two particular examples. In both those instances, and we'll give particular examples in just a moment, but in both those instances, the basic idea is to allow countries in the European Union to cooperate with other countries in the EU to combat transnational crime. Europol involves cooperation and cooperative agreements between the various police agencies. Eurojust involves cooperation among the prosecutorial agencies within the European Union countries. Europol headquarters are located in The Hague, the Netherlands. It is similar to Interpol, which you have probably heard about, in that Europol doesn't operate as an independent police agency, nor does Interpol, but instead it's an organization that tries to facilitate the sharing of information amongst the EU countries, just as Interpol tries to facilitate the sharing of information among all the countries of the world who have chosen to be members of the Interpol network. So Europol is comprised of those countries in the European Union, and they send representatives from the various police agencies to The Hague, and they operate at the Europol headquarters. And basically it's a way for them to have face-to-face contact with one another and be able to walk down the hallway specifically and have the representative from Austria meet with the representative from Spain and work together on information about crimes and criminals that are operating, or at least suspected to be operating, in both countries or in other countries as well. So Europol serves as that basis. They have a database that is established to share information. Different countries puts information into and can get it out of that database. And again, it's a system of information sharing. It's also important to note that the United States, for example, and there might be a few other countries as well that are not members of the European Union, still have a representative at Europol headquarters. This is done primarily because the EU fully understands that all transnational crime and all helpful information isn't appropriate only for the European Union. There might be times, for example, when the United States is or can be helpful in providing information to combat crime that's occurring in the EU. And for that reason, there is quite typically a regular representative of the United States sitting at Europol headquarters in The Hague to make themselves available to share information. As I mentioned, Eurojust does a similar type of thing, but for the prosecutorial agencies within the European Union. So just as the police are sharing information, so too are the prosecutors. This can be helpful in trying to help track down suspects or determine how information can be gathered about a suspect in a different country. If Spain believes that a person who has committed a crime in Spain is now in another European country, in Austria, for example, they might want to request some kind of surveillance of that person while they're in Austria to help build their case in Spain. Well, since the rules of evidence and eavesdropping might differ between the two countries, the Spanish officials may need to check with the Austrian officials to find out what kind of process they can go through to get electronic listening devices, for example, that will track the whereabouts and conversations of that suspect. The Eurojust representatives are able to help each other determine what is the proper paperwork to fill out in order to get that accomplished, and how to go about requesting information, or if it's not even possible. You could just save a lot of time and money by simply saying, I'm sorry, but what you want to do is not possible to do in our country, even though it might be possible in your own country. So Eurojust provides those kinds of attempts to cooperate between the various countries. This is the place where I was going to be adding a sample quiz, but it appears that YouTube won't allow me to upload that particular part of this presentation. So I'm afraid I won't be able to do that. Sorry.